Let's discuss Chapter 1 of the Federal Aviation Administration Weight and Balance Handbook. And Chapter 1 is basically an introduction. It's going to tell us why it's important to look at weight and balance for an AMT, for an aircraft maintenance technician. There are four basic things that they point out, the FAA points out in the very beginning. And item number 1 says that the designers of an aircraft set the maximum weight based on the amount of lift the wings or rotors can provide under operations that the airplane is designed for. The structural strength of the aircraft also limits how much weight you can put on the airplane. Number 2, the manufacturer provides the pilot, the aircraft operator, with an empty weight CG location. Now this empty weight CG location is a range. And so the manufacturer says if you load this airplane within these ranges, the airplane will be safe to fly. Number 3, talks about us, FAA certificated mechanics. We need to keep the records of the airplane current. So we will weigh the airplane and we will give the pilot a starting point from which they can do their calculations. So our calculations have to be correct for their calculations to be correct. And they're going to have to do these calculations as they fly the airplane when they're operating it. Number 4 is that the pilot in command, the pilot has the responsibility to know that his airplane is within the CG limits. So if we do our job right, then he can do his job right. Next, the FAA talks about flying the airplane. And when you fly an airplane, normal maneuvers are safe to perform as long as the airplane is in balance and is not overweight. So next what we're going to talk about is what happens if an airplane is overweight. Here's the effects of overloading an aircraft. The aircraft needs a higher speed to take off. And that means it's going to use longer amount of runway to get up to that speed. So an overloaded airplane is difficult to take off. It's difficult to get it off the ground. The rate of climb and angle of climb are greatly reduced. The altitude, the service ceiling, the altitude to which the airplane can fly is not as high. When you're heavy, it's hard to get the airplane to go up high. The cruising speed is reduced, the cruising range is shortened, maneuverability is decreased, and a longer landing roll is required to land the airplane. Excessive loads can be imposed on the structure, especially in turbulence, and landing an overweight airplane can damage the structure. So now we move on to stability. I'm going to grab my airplane off the wall here. Here's the airplane. And we're going to talk about stability of an airplane in flight. So, normally, as we looked at in the other video, we have to have air over the wings and air over the tail that allows us to produce the amount of lift off each airfoil to safely control the airplane. But if we are overloaded, when we do things like steep turns, the airplane can get into trouble in a steep turn. Stalling speed can be affected by an overloaded airplane. Now what we want to talk about is putting the weight in the wrong place, making it tail heavy, making it nose heavy. So we can look at the result of what we saw in our video. Figure 1-1 shows the longitudinal forces, and this is exactly what we were looking at when we were running the fan. Figure 1-2 shows a Aft CG. So we put too much weight. We got too much weight in the baggage compartment, and the airplane wants to fly like this. So the pilot is always pushing forward on the stick, trying to lower the nose. So if we get slow, just like we saw in the video, figure 1-2 shows us that we have insufficient elevator nose-down force. This is one of the most dangerous conditions, because if the airplane gets slow, it quits producing enough lift over the tail surface, and the slower we go, the less lift that this thing can produce. So we're flying along, and the pilot's got to pull back, but as we get slower and slower, we don't have as much air, and this guy is less and less effective. This is the kind of thing that causes a stall or a stall spin type of condition. A stall is where the airplane stalls, and it's not hardly flyable, and it falls to the ground pretty fast. If we have enough altitude, we can recover. Sometimes a stall will put us into a spin, and the airplane will go into a spinning condition. And that is a very deadly maneuver. So we do not like aft CGs, especially if they're too far aft. Here is a forward CG. In this situation, it might be difficult to take off. The nose is heavy on here. That's what they're showing us in here, and the CG is too far forward. This is a nose-heavy condition. A lateral condition can happen. A good example of a lateral condition is when we've got too much fuel in this tank, and it gives us a heavy wing. And that's what we're looking at in Figure 1-4, is we're looking at a lateral imbalance of weight. Now, Figure 1.5 shows us that in a lot of airplanes, this is a swept wing airplane, that the outboard fuel tank shows that this is if you look at this line, here's the CG here in the middle, right? And if you look at this axis here, so this outboard fuel is back pretty far behind the CG. The inboard fuel is in front of the CG. So if you have full tanks, these inboard tanks are full, it makes the weight heavier on the nose. If you have full outboard tanks, it makes it a little heavier towards the tail. As the airplane burns off fuel in flight, the center of gravity will move. And this is normal. This is normal as long as it's all within limits. So these are the major factors that are discussed in Chapter 1 of the reading.